This is DW News live from Berlin. Countdown to the end of a career in politics. Angela Merkel is about to deliver her last speech as German Chancellor to Parliament. Merkel will not be standing for re-election and is preparing to step aside after 16 years in office. We will bring you full coverage of her address. I'm Sumi Somaskanda. Welcome to our special coverage. In just a few minutes, Angela Merkel will deliver what is expected to be her last speech to Parliament as German Chancellor. We're going to bring in some live pictures here from the Bundestag, where Parliament is in session. You see the Bundestag president there, Wolfgang Schäuble, just speaking. He's going to be introducing the Chancellor. Now, Angela Merkel's career as head of the German government has spanned almost 16 years. And as many of you know, Germans are due to go to the polls in September to elect a new parliament. But Angela Merkel is not running for office. OK, we're keeping a close eye on that session in Parliament, but we have our chief political editor, Michael Küffner, here with us in studio. Michael, as we wait for the Chancellor to speak, what do you think we can expect? Last regular speech in Parliament?
I think she will keep it as regular as possible. She already disappointed to a certain degree when she had her last Chancellor's question time yesterday. There were no words of wisdom. There was no legacy building really there. She was very upbeat and actually having a bit of fun in Parliament, asking questions from all different directions. Today, she has work to do. She has to explain why Germany and France are proposing the first summit with Russia since 2014. No bilateral meetings between the EU per se and Russia have officially taken place. That came as a last-minute proposal, so she will have some explaining to do, and I think it will be very interesting also what she has to say on China. I would expect her to steer clear of making this sound like a long goodbye as far as she's concerned, and that waving goodbye has taken place on the other side. She's not engaging in this yet.
Yeah, it wouldn't really be in line with her character, would it be? We keep saying likely last speech. Explain why that is.
That's because if everything goes according to plan and there is a new German government just after the 26th of September, yes, it is her last. But last time we saw that it can take months for a coalition to be formed here in Germany. So she might well still be head of that government come the next summit in the autumn.
And I see that Chancellor Merkel has just stepped up to the podium, though. So let's go right to Parliament and listen into her speech.
1,5 Jahren hält uns die Bekämpfung der Coronavirus-Pandemie in Atem, national wie international. Im Rahmen der G7 und der G20-Staaten, wie auch natürlich
within the G7 and G20 states and in the EU member countries. By now, Europe can start to be carefully optimistic. Not just in Germany, but in virtually all European member countries, infection rates are significantly lower. But almost at the same time, we see an increase of those people already vaccinated. Despite this reason for some optimism, the pandemic isn't over yet, and above not in the poorer countries of this world, where we in Europe and in Germany are still skating on thin ice. We need to remain vigilant. Particularly new mutations, particularly the new Delta variant, need us to be cautioned. So we need to be cautious in this course of the pandemic, and this is also one of the center points of the European deliberations. First, the international COVID certificate. In May, together with the European Parliament, we agreed on a format which will be valid throughout Europe. A very important signal. Technically, this certificate could also be implemented just before the summer holidays from the 1st of July. It will be binding and applicable throughout the EU. Germany has done its homework, thanks to all of those who worked on this. By now, almost 30 million digital certificates have been assigned. The health minister told me last night at 8 p.m. it's 29.2 million. So we have lived up to our claim to develop a joint European standard, both for those who are vaccinated, for those who have recovered, and for these people generally. And in this way, we can generally decide for each member country which rights to give to those people. And now we're looking at the worldwide distribution of vaccines. That is another subject we'll be discussing at the Council meeting starting today. 2 weeks ago at the G7 meeting in Cornwall, we sent out a very strong signal. We know pandemic can only be vanquished globally, and the key to doing so is vaccination. Therefore, it's important that by 2022, 2.3 billion doses of vaccine can be made possible, distributed by the G7 countries to the poorer countries. But it remains very important that we have joint purchasing of vaccines in Europe. Let me re-emphasize this. Any other option might, in the short run, have given advantages to one or the other member countries, but living in a single market, that would have been detrimentally affected. We can't say it often enough. So far, the European Union has been and will remain the biggest exporter of vaccines globally. We didn't close our markets off. We didn't build barriers. With 2.2 billion euros, Germany is also the second largest donor of the ACT's accelerator. And of these 2.2 billion euros, 1.6 billion have been provided for the vaccination column of COVAX, the International Vaccination Alliance. We also decided that 30 million doses of vaccine will be given to COVAX, primarily at least, before the end of the year. We also have to make sure, as the European Union, we increase the global vaccination rate. Germany is actively committed here, together with South Africa, as co-chairs of the high-ranking working level that COVAX has set up for that very purpose. I am absolutely convinced that on the basis of licenses, we can quickly increase the vaccine available. However, politically induced suspension of patents is a path I consider to be wrong. The way in which today we need vaccines for everybody as quickly as possible all over the world, we will also in the future need to rely on the development of vaccines. And the only way this can be done is if the protection of intellectual property isn't suspended but is maintained. I would also like to welcome our Team Europe initiative to promote the production enlargement system in South Africa, which the EU is going to support with 1 billion euros. This is an investment in infrastructure, production capacity, training and many more things. It's the right way to give Africa the tools they need to help themselves, and later this will apply to other vaccines as well, not just to the anti-COVID ones. Third, first lessons from the crisis. The European Commission last week presented a statement for our deliberations in the Council where they give us their view and the member countries will add their experiences. What is clear is that before the pandemic is behind us, a debate about lessons to be learned can only constitute an initial step of what has to be a longer and far more profound process, but it's a first step which is important, and our ability and willingness to engage in that will decide how in future the European Union is going to master challenges of a similar scale, in particular how we can do so jointly from the very beginning. Because in the pandemic, after a first shock, it was national endeavours and action that determined what we did before we adopted a joint European approach. Today we know we can do better, and we will do better in the future. That is why, particularly in our response to crisis, in health protection, the Schengen Agreement, the single market, these are all areas where we need to discuss how to strengthen Europe's ability to act. It's important that at this European Council meeting we start talking about this. Coordinating very stringent restrictions, however necessary they may be, started far too slowly. If push comes to shove in the future, this has to be done more quickly. But we do have to admit, even today, We aren't sufficiently well organized when it comes to people traveling to Europe from third countries, particularly from areas where the virus is prevalent. We don't coordinate well enough, and I will mention this at the meeting. But it's an absolute necessity to do this, because an area where freedom is one of the most important but also most sensitive achievements of the European Union. The Commission also has proposals for improved crisis response, crisis reaction as far as public health care is concerned, and Germany supports the gradual establishment of a health union and the development of a new health emergency preparedness and response authority, HERA in short. Fourth, economic recovery post-pandemic. That also is one of the subjects we discuss at the Council. We have the NGEU, Next Generation EU agreement, and this has demonstrated solidarity and also that Europe can act. An extraordinary crisis demanded an extraordinary response from the European Union, which we gave. There's also going to be a Euro summit in what we call the inclusive format, in other words, with all other member countries participating. But this is where we'll be continuing the discussion about economic recovery, the status of the banking union, the capital market union. These will be some of the subjects. The finance ministers have already prepared this, and the chairperson of the Eurogroup will be present. After the ratification of the own resources agreement by all member countries of the European Union, and let me take this opportunity of thanking the German Parliament for its support here, but now, as a result of this agreement, the Commission is able and empowered by member countries to take out loans in the financial market. 2 days ago in Germany, this has also been positively assessed and has now been submitted to the Federal Council, the second chamber. The first billion has already been placed by the Commission. Most member countries have also submitted their national recovery and resilience plans, including the German one, which has already been assessed by the Union. But let me re-emphasize, we are sticking to what we agreed last year. Before any funds can be made available, it's crucial that the relevant national recovery and resilience plans are cautiously set up, innovative and forward-looking. And in any further assessment of these plans by the Council, this is what we'll be looking for, because it's not just to invest money, but also to reform with these funds. The recovery plan needs to be used in order to prepare the ground in Europe, which is necessary for the future, and to catch up what we lost. So plans for recovery will entail in particular green renewal and digitization, because we know that only when we transform to a digitized green economy will Europe be viable and competitive for the future. And ladies and gentlemen, today, when we are beginning to see that we'll emerge from the pandemic, it's very important that at the European Council meeting we are looking not just at economic recovery, but also turn towards some of the other issues important to Europe. One of them, it goes without saying, is the issue of migration. When reforming the common European asylum policy and our asylum system, we mustn't slacken. However difficult the debate is, that issue will stay with us for some time to come. I therefore welcome the fact that we have come closer to establishing a joint European asylum agency. At the Council meeting this time, we are going to focus on cooperation with countries of destination and transit. The European Foreign Service, for example, will be tasked to develop concrete steps and a timeline for setting up such cooperation with these key countries. We also expect the Commission to submit a concrete proposal how to fund all the migration cooperation between the European Union and Turkey. 3.7 million Syrian refugees are registered in Turkey, and it is clear that the current and forthcoming migratory issues can only be solved in dialogue with Turkey. As we had already agreed in March, we as the European Union should quickly implement the dialogue agenda with Turkey and to promote our cooperation where we share interests. And this also means that we need to continue with our talks on how to realize a customs union. Health, climate protection, combating terrorism are also part of this. It's a strategic cooperation which we need to drive forward, despite the fact there are profound differences between us and Turkey when it comes to fundamental human rights and human rights. Another important issue in foreign policy terms is our relationship with Russia. At the European Council meeting, the discussion which we started in May will be continued. Commission and European Foreign Service have submitted a discussion paper which in particular will analyse the status of these relations. And I hope that at the Council meeting we won't stop at that. The events in recent months, and I'm not just speaking of Germany, but they have made clear that it's not sufficient to have an uncoordinated response to the many different Russian actions. Instead, we need to create mechanisms so we can stand united and provide a united answer to provocations. It's the only way in which we can learn to withstand the many hybrid attacks coming from Russia. Simultaneously, an agenda of joint strategic interests need to be defined. For example, when it comes to climate protection, but equally when it comes to peace and security and resolving the situations in both Libya and Syria. It is undeniable that on the basis of its close geopolitical situation, the proximity to the countries of Eastern Europe, we have responsibility to the countries of Belarus, Ukraine and the countries in the Eastern Balkans. So it is up to us to provide an appropriate answer to Russian provocations. I think as the European Union it is therefore necessary for us to seek direct contact with Russia and the Russian president. It's not enough if the American President Joe Biden talks to the Russian president, which I welcome, but the European Union also needs to create formats for dialogue. Dear colleagues, at the G7 summit from 11 to 13 June in Cornwall and at the NATO summit on 14 June, we discussed extensively how to deal with both Russia and China. Since the last G7 summit in Biarritz 2019, certainly the world hasn't calmed down. There's a great number of crises all over the world requiring close agreement between the partners, more than ever. It's therefore particularly important for the G7 this year to have demonstrated that it's a closed alliance of values resolutely standing for multilateralism. Apart from discussing Russia, it also entails the relationship with China. The G7 has to and wishes to find a way of resolving the challenges in the relationship with China. We are also convinced, though, that with our shared interests and values, there are many countries in the world that could be given a better offer of cooperation from us than China. For example, as the G7 countries, we would like to help fund sustainable infrastructure in developing countries, and a task force is going to work out concrete proposals for this. Next year, Germany is going to chair the G7 meetings and initial results will then be submitted. Another important issue of the G7 meeting was climate protection and the protection of biodiversity. Because we know that even in our own country, the pandemic shouldn't distract us from the fact that we are indeed facing a huge global challenge. It's about no more or less than the future of our planet. It's therefore good that the G7 countries are jointly committing to climate neutrality by 2050 at the latest, and in Germany we are going beyond this target. COP26 in Glasgow will show just how far we've got in keeping these obligations. The G7 countries are also raising climate funding internationally. Prospectively, Germany's contribution, which is currently 4 billion euros, and it's going to be raised by 2025 at the latest to the level of 6 billion euros per annum. And that is a very strong signal of credibility. Also in the NATO summit on 14 June, multilateral cooperation was at the heart of matters. It gave the alliance an opportunity to open a new chapter in the transatlantic cooperation and to clear a path for the strategic alignment of NATO with a view to the future decade. This is expressed in the mandate that by the Spain summit in 2022, a new strategic concept is to be elaborated, as well as a packet of measures for NATO 2030. I would like to thank Thomas de Maizière for the preparatory work and the report of the Reflection Group. From my point of view, in all of this, what really matters is that its core jobs and the primary challenges is what NATO really focuses on. And for me, that's primarily Russia, but also a conflict about fragility in our proximity, Central Asia, Middle East, the Sahel, Northern Africa, and of course, the threats coming from cyberspace and from hybrid space need to be countered, and the increasing importance of China to be taken into account. All of this is in our direct interests in Germany and Europe, because NATO is and will remain an irreplaceable guarantee for peace and stability in Europe. So Germany will continue to make its contribution in political as well as military terms. And this is why it was necessary that our efforts regarding defense spending are consistently continued, so we comply with the obligations of the alliance and to fulfill what we need to do for security in Europe and in our neighbouring countries. More and more NATO member countries are achieving the 2% defence spending target we set in Wales, and in the next few years Germany will need to be active here. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got months behind us where there were many new multilateral impulses, and I'm convinced that as a community of nations we can only be successful in combating the challenges of the pandemic and all the other big jobs ahead of us if we act jointly. A sovereign European Union should be a strong partner on this path. And this is what today and tomorrow we'll be working on in Brussels. Thank you.
If you're just tuning in, we've been watching German Chancellor Angela Merkel there deliver what is likely to be her last speech to Parliament. She is preparing to step down after 16 years in office. And we heard Chancellor Merkel there touch on a broad array of topics, including the vaccination campaign here in Germany, also Europe, and some of the big items on the agenda for her upcoming European summit, which is also likely to be one of her last. And let's listen in. We're hearing some applause here. Again, this is her last speech in Parliament.
Ich eröffne die Aussprache und erteile das Wort der Fraktionsvorsitzenden der AfD, Frau Dr. Alice Weidel.
Guten Morgen. All right, our chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, has been watching this with us. Michaela, you, ahead of that speech, predicted this would be a very regular address to Parliament, and it appeared that it was, except for that little bit at the end there, that longer applause, right?
Yes, that very long applause that clearly was driven by her own CDU-CSU Conservative Union, but many of those MPs know, and also particularly looking at the opinion polls right now, some are likely not to be part of this Parliament again, but for sure they know that they are unlikely to see Angela Merkel in that spot once again. Also, one unusual thing is that she thanked Thomas de Maizière, he's actually one of her closest allies from day one. He was German defense minister, he was also interior minister, and he just did quite a bit of work on NATO's new strategic outlook. So that the fact that she thanked him by name is highly unusual, and I think it's the only real hint we got here that she too is actually in a goodbye mode, thanking those closest allies. But apart from that, it was really her taking stock, if you listen to this address, of what the key challenges are for Germany and for Europe at this moment in time in the world right now. And a lot of that is on the agenda when EU leaders meet in Brussels today.
Yeah, she definitely was taking stock there. Let's go over to our correspondent, Nina Hase, who is in the German parliament. She was listening in to the speech for us there, and she can join us now to give us some of her impressions. Nina, we don't see you yet. I hope you can hear us. If you can, the question, what was the atmosphere like there? Okay, great. So what was the atmosphere like there in Parliament just now?
Well, it is, as always, almost underwhelming if you think about the fact that this could be a historic day. It could be her last address to Parliament, but this is so very much Angela Merkel. She delivers her points that she wants to make. Everybody listens. There's a bit of applause here and there, but it's basically very much business as usual. And this is probably something that you have to explain to other countries around the world, because of course it doesn't happen very often that here in Germany we have the last speech of a reigning chancellor in Parliament. Angela Merkel has been in power for 16 years. Helmut Kohl was in power for 16 years. So, you know, this is a historic day, but not much of that was felt here today.
What about the points that she made in her speech, laying out what is ahead for the European Union, for example, some of the larger goals that she has there as well? Could anything be gleaned from that?
Well, of course, you know, she has Parliament's backing for most of the points. She has a strong majority still in Parliament, and she knows that the entire European Union turns to Germany to look for something like to be an engine to drive foreign policy forward as well. But of course, this is something that now her successors will have to deal with, and that was interesting, if I may add that we saw all the three chancellor candidates who are now trying to become her successors. They were all here today in Parliament. Armin Laschet is going to he's the Conservative candidate, he's going to give his first speech in Parliament in almost 23 years. Olaf Scholz is, of course, the finance minister from the Social Democrats. He's also here. He's not a member of Bundestag, but he will still deliver a speech as well, because his party has decided that it wouldn't look so good if he was the only one who didn't deliver a speech. And Annalena Baerbock is, of course, the 40-year-old candidate from the Greens, who's also here and dressed in bright red. So that's a signal that she wants to be seen and she wants to take the stage.
Yeah, the election season certainly is heating up here. Michela, coming back to you, we heard Nina say underwhelming there, but we know the Chancellor has faced so many crises over her time in office. And I know, you know, we're going to be talking about her legacy for the weeks and months to come, really. But looking at that speech, I mean, what do you think you see when you see Angela Merkel now speaking to Parliament and taking this legacy with her? I mean, what stands out to you?
Well, that she doesn't give up and close. She's unwilling to close a chapter. I mean, let's take what was at the same time a high point in history and will become her legacy, which was that migration moment in 2015. But it's also her most spectacular failure in failing to get the EU, even since then, together to actually have a common strategy. Here she says well, Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN, will be a guest. There will be talks of migration. She tries until that very last moment to get Europe to at least make a step towards a common asylum policy within the EU. But she knows that she won't succeed. This is not going to be done and dusted for her to actually add under the chapter Merkel in the history books. What you can also sense there is that she's tangibly annoyed with several EU members, particularly when it comes on the issue of the COVID-19 variants. Germany has rather tight restrictions there. There are other countries like Spain and Portugal, she did mention them, that are more liberal. What she means is that they allow in British tourists, and that is seen as a high risk, is also classified as a high risk in Germany, that the EU must find common grounds there. So that is something that is clearly right in front of her, and that is a crisis to be solved. At the same time, she is the one, over those 16 years, actually she was in office throughout the reign, I can say, of Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader. He wasn't always president, he was also prime minister in between, but details. And here she proposes, she's the one who actually drove the EU to a common stance to actually be in favour of sanctions. She still backs this over Ukraine, or over Crimea. At the same time, it's her and the French president who are now putting a proposal on the table to have a summit with Russia, to not just leave it to the United States, to have this highest level meeting, because Russia is geographically simply something the EU has to deal with. So she is a hard worker until that very last moment. And then we have this very awkward long applause. She really suffers during these long applauses, be it a party conference. She's been through quite a few of those, and she has a few more to get through. She knows it. It's still coming. But what we didn't see is Alice Weidel, of course, the opposition leader, taking the stage. And she would quite clearly communicate, and has done already in those few words I heard, her sense of relief that Angela Merkel will be leaving in September for sure.
Indeed. Nina, we heard the Chancellor there speaking about lessons learned from the crisis. How much has this pandemic really marked and shaped her last months in office?
Oh, definitely. There were lots of plans. Of course, Germany was leading the European Council last year in the second half of 2020. And of course, they had a massive agenda. They wanted to drive lots of policies forward as a strong motor in the European Union. And they couldn't do that because they just had to switch to crisis mode, and they had to find quick solutions to also help the more underdeveloped countries in the European Union to get through this crisis. And of course, this is going to have a massive effect on the next couple of budgets of the German parliament here, of the German government over the next few decades even. Some people are saying that the costs of the corona crisis might be tangible in Germany until the year 2045.
Last question for you, Michaela. You said that, migration is not something that Chancellor Merkel can necessarily add to her chapter of time in office, finding an agreement on that. But do you think that she has a list of priorities that she absolutely wants to see through before her time in office is up? And of course, we don't know exactly when that will be.
Well, look, when Germany took the EU presidency the second half of last year, she wanted to actually bring Europe together to have this European legacy. And what we're seeing here is both on Russia, but also on China, that she keeps working to stop basically bilateral talks of individual EU members with the big powers of the future, namely China. And we see her working very, very hard on that. At the same time, she's still in crisis fighting mode. She herself said, we're on thin ice. This crisis isn't over yet, and it won't be over by the time she leaves office in September.
All right. Our chief political editor, Michaela Küffner, and of course, our political reporter, Nina Haase, in Parliament. As always, good to talk to you both. Now, let's take a look back. Our political correspondent, Simon Young, has gathered a few of the notable moments in Chancellor Merkel's political career that may shape her legacy.
Germany can do more. I'm convinced Germany can make it. Europe will succeed together, and I could say Europe will only succeed together. We will conquer this virus. I'm sure that we can accomplish it. The colour of her jackets may have changed, but over the 16 years of her chancellorship, much about Angela Merkel has remained constant. Since her first government policy statement as Chancellor in 2005, she's faced a litany of crises: the financial crash, mass migration, the pandemic. Whatever the strains behind the scenes, her performances in Parliament always showed the Merkelian focus. We want to create the conditions so that in 10 years Germany is once again among the top 3 in Europe. I think that's a legitimate and important goal. I'm still convinced Britain's departure from the EU must be an orderly one. Several times a year, always before the EU summits, but on other occasions too, the Chancellor gave a big speech in the Bundestag. We all know the pictures of desperate people, of African refugees on fragile boats. We cannot just watch it happen. Merkel was seldom a sparkling orator, but there was usually plenty of meat. Always well prepared, mostly sober and measured in tone, and at times she spoke with inspiration. This is a unique opportunity to make our interests and our values a reality. What we're seeing on a daily basis, attacks on Jews, on foreigners, violence and hate speech, we have to fight against it. Missteps, such as leaving her face mask on the lectern, were rare. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has given a new value to Merkel's solid style. Whatever the colour of the jackets, that quality of calm confidence is a big part of what people will remember Merkel for. I'm convinced that in the end, and this is my firm belief and it's my mission which I will continue to fulfil until the end of my term, together we can be successful in conquering the pandemic and leading our country back into better times.
All right, on to some other news now. Libya's decade of chaos and conflict could be drawing to a close after peace talks here in Berlin. The German host secured a pledge from the 17 countries taking part to withdraw foreign fighters and to keep the North African country on track for elections scheduled for December. Libya has been a battleground for rival militias since dictator Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011.
It got off to a confusing